The sky above Trelos turned dark with smoke, even though it was still morning. Buildings burned in the capital city, flames licking the towers that once stood proud and beautiful. The people of Trelos ran through the streets, screaming, holding their children, falling, hiding, praying. No one had expected the Zakari Empire to come so fast. The Zakari were not just soldiers, they were monsters in armor. They didn't take prisoners, they took slaves. They didn't spare hospitals, they bombed them first. Their ships hovered in the sky like giant metal vultures, watching, scanning, ready to strike again. Queen Alira stood on her palace balcony, trembling, her long silver dress stained with ash. She had sent the call for help hours ago, but there was no reply. Her advisors told her the truth. The rest of the galaxy would not interfere. Trelos was not part of any strong alliance. And no one wanted to anger the Zakari. Alira's heart ached not for herself, but for the children still crying in the palace basement. She turned to her communication officer. "Send it again," she whispered. "Send it on every channel. Every frequency, every language. Tell them we are dying. Tell them we beg for help." On a distant space station orbiting a red dwarf star, someone received the message. The station's name was Outpost Vega 9, and it didn't belong to the Zakari. It didn't belong to any known species in the galaxy. It belonged to humans. The message came in as a weak signal, filled with static and broken cries. A tech officer called over his commanding officer. "Sir, incoming distress signal, Trelos sector," the tech said. "Looks bad, planetary invasion. Possibly total collapse." Captain Aaron Briggs stood quietly in front of the main screen. Arms crossed, he was a tall man with tired eyes and a hard jaw. Someone who had seen war before and never liked it. He listened to the message. Not once, but 3 times. The images showed alien families running, burning cities, and finally, a single sentence from Queen Alira herself. "To whoever hears this, please, we beg you, help us." Around the room, the crew looked at each other, unsure. Everyone knew what Trelos was, and everyone knew the Zakari Empire, and everyone knew that Earth had made one rule long ago: do not contact us unless you are ready for consequences. Captain Briggs said nothing at first. Then he turned to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Nora Blake. "Is this signal verified?" he asked. "Triple-checked," she replied. "This is real." He nodded slowly, looked back at the burning planet on the screen. "They didn't call for diplomats," he finally said, voice low and steady. "They called for help." Nora blinked. "Sir?" "Prepare the fleet," he said, turning toward the command deck. "Send the order. Battle Fleet Shadow is going dark. We jump in 12 hours. Alarms lit up in the station. But not warnings. These were activation codes, deep within the outposts. Hangars, massive warships powered up for the first time in years. The USS Ironclad, an old but deadly cruiser, roared to life. The USS Liberty Flame, fast and armed with railguns, rolled onto the launch rail. The most feared of them all, the USS Widowmaker, released its docking clamps with a low growl of energy. Each ship had its own reputation, its own story of victory and destruction. Earth didn't send these ships to negotiate. Earth sent them to end wars. Down in the barracks, soldiers loaded weapons. Marines sealed their exosuits, and pilots checked their strike fighters, men and women from Earth, battle-hardened and trained on the deadliest planet in the galaxy. They didn't wear shining gold like other species' fleets. They wore matte black, carbon gray, and blood red. A young pilot named Kelly Monroe sat in her fighter, whispering to the picture of her brother who had died years ago. "This one's for you," she said softly, then slid on her helmet. The mood across the station changed. From confusion to calm focus. Everyone had a job to do, and they would do it well. Aboard the Widowmaker, Captain Briggs stood on the bridge as the countdown began. "Why are we doing this?" asked a younger officer. "They're not human." Briggs looked at him without blinking. "Because we are," he said. Then he spoke the final command, "Engage warp." The stars outside stretched into lines. The ships vanished into jump space. Trelos would not be alone much longer. The Deathworlders were coming. Not to negotiate, not to discuss peace, but to bring fire, metal, and justice. And this time, the monsters who burned cities were going to feel what it was like to be hunted, far away from the burning skies of Trelos, deep in the black silence of space. Earth's war machines began to wake up. No music played, no celebrations, no proud speeches, only cold lights blinking, deep rumbling engines powering on, and warriors preparing for a fight no one else dared to answer. This wasn't a diplomatic fleet, it was a battle fleet, and it had only one purpose: war. The first ship to fully power up was the USS Ironclad, a heavy cruiser covered in black armor plates and missile pods. It was old, tough, and built like a space tank. Inside, engineers checked the railgun alignment, nuclear warheads, and energy shielding. Everything was perfect. Captain Daryl Knox, a man with half his face scarred from an old plasma blast, walked the deck slowly, checking every station. "We're not going in to make friends," he told his crew. "We're going to make sure monsters learn fear again." Beside the Ironclad, another beast of a ship activated. The USS Liberty Flame, sleek, fast, and deadly. It was a hunter-class ship made for chasing enemies and tearing them apart. It had no comfortable rooms, no soft chairs, just rows of missiles in tight corridors built for speed. Lieutenant Eva Carter, the ship's lead gunner, loaded the torpedoes herself, her gloves stained with oil and grease. She didn't trust machines to handle something so important. Farther back, in a hidden hangar, the most feared ship was released. From its magnetic locks, the USS Widowmaker, dark and silent, floated into position like a predator that had just smelled blood. No lights, no signal, no crew speaking, only shadows moving inside special forces teams checking their weapons. Sharpshooters loading rounds, and at the center of it all, Captain Aaron Briggs watched silently as the jump coordinates were loaded. Earth didn't need a fleet with shining gold and polished silver. Earth sent ships painted in the colors of war black, gray, and blood red. These ships didn't look beautiful. They looked dangerous. On the main deck of the Widowmaker, crew members moved quickly but calmly, following orders with military precision. Some of them had fought in asteroid belt raids, others had taken down pirate fleets. Now they were going into something worse, an empire of slavers. In the flight bay, young pilot Kelly Monroe sat inside her fighter, helmet in her lap, staring at the launch rails. She had never fought the Zakari, but she'd heard the stories: children taken, towns burned, civilians used for target practice. That wasn't war, that was evil, and evil deserved only one answer: fire. Across the hangar, Marines from Echo Squad prepared for ground combat. Their armor was thick, their weapons sharp and tested. Sergeant Riley Brooks, the team leader, spoke to his squad as they checked their gear. "This isn't a rescue mission," he said. "It's punishment." "But sir," one soldier asked, "we're helping them, aren't we?" Brooks looked at him, then smiled slightly. "We're helping them by making sure it never happens again," he replied, while the warships loaded their final systems. Captain Briggs stood at the bridge's main window, staring into the black void. He thought about the message again, the voice of Queen Alira, shaking, filled with fear, begging anyone for help. He clenched his jaw. They had cried out to the stars. Now the stars were sending monsters, but these monsters wore human skin, and they fought for the helpless. Briggs walked down to the strategy table, where the other captains waited. The screen in front of them showed Trelos, already half red from Zakari bombing. "We don't go in like heroes," he said. "We go in like ghosts. Strike fast, strike hard, vanish before they know what hit them. Make them feel fear before they ever see our faces." The captains nodded, no one smiling. There was no joy in this, only duty. Briggs pointed to a cluster of Zakari patrols near the Trelos orbit. "We hit here, here, and here," he said, marking the screen. "First strikes, full power, 0. Mercy. They'll expect words," he added, voice growing cold. But we're not bringing words. We're bringing warships. Back in the hangars, the launch lights turned green. Fighters powered up, their engines glowing with blue. Fire, drones were released. Scanning jump space ahead for traps. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Inside each ship, crew members secured themselves to seats, strapped into cockpits, tightened armor. 7, 6. Pilots whispered last words to themselves, some touching small photos, some praying. 5, 4. No one on Earth was watching this. No reporters, no politics, just silence and steel. 3, 2, 1. The entire fleet vanished into jump space. The stars stretched like liquid, the warships vanishing into the black, and for a brief moment, the void was quiet again. But the galaxy had changed. The Deathworlders were coming, and they weren't here to talk. They were coming with railguns, missile storms, armor that didn't break, and hearts that wouldn't stop beating until justice was served. They were coming not as invaders, but as executioners of evil. And the Zakari would soon learn that no empire, no matter how cruel, could stand against a planet that had survived everything its own nature had thrown at it. Earth had sent its monsters, but these monsters protected the weak. They answered the call not with peace, but with power. And soon, fire would rain from the skies of Trillos, but this time, it would burn the right targets. The Zakari destroyer floated silently above the eastern continent of Trelos, watching smoke rise from the capital below. Its black spiked hull glowed faint red from the heat of the last orbital blast. Inside, the Zakari crew laughed and celebrated, playing a recording of the Queen's desperate message over the loudspeakers. Mocking her voice, "We beg for help." The recording played again and again, followed by loud Zakari laughter. They didn't fear anyone. Not after what they had done. They had crushed 8 planets already, enslaved millions, and burned cities just for fun. Trelos would fall like all the rest. Their commander, Zorkan, a tall creature with 4 eyes and armored skin, sat on his throne-like chair, sipping a cold drink made from Trollo's water. "Let the cowards cry," he said. "No one is coming." But then, something strange happened. One of the sensors started blinking. Red unfamiliar signals had entered the system. Zorkan raised one brow, annoyed. "What is it now?" he growled. A junior officer looked confused. "It's multiple unknowns, sir." "How many?" Zorkan snapped. The officer turned pale. 7 ships. "But their design doesn't match any known fleets." Zorkan stood up slowly, now alert. "Where are they?" he asked, approaching from the far side of the moon. The officer said, "No IFF signals, no responses to hails." The Zakari ship's screens flickered, then showed something that made everyone go silent. A large warship had just uncloaked near the moon's orbit. Its name was stamped in cold white letters, USS Widowmaker. For a full 5 seconds, no one spoke. Then the comms crackled, and a message played through the Zakari bridge, a deep human voice, firm and calm. "You attacked civilians, you enslaved children, you have one chance, surrender." Zorkan burst out laughing. "Whoever you are, we do not surrender to ghosts." Then the Widowmaker opened fire. A railgun blast struck the Zakari destroyer, with such force it tore through 3 decks in 1 second. Explosions ripped through the ship's midsection, as fire and air escaped into the stars. Zorkan screamed, fell back as the lights on the bridge exploded. Hull breaches opened across the ship, alarms blared, and systems failed one after another. The Zakari ship had no time to even launch a counterattack. It broke apart in space-twisted metal spinning through the black void, then vanished into a silent explosion. The Widowmaker didn't stop. Behind it, more ships emerged from jump space: USS Ironclad, USS Liberty Flame, USS Thunderchild, and several smaller Hunter-class ships. They formed a wide arc, surrounding the Trollo's orbit like a steel net. Humanity hadn't sent a message or a peace offer. They had sent judgment inside the Ironclad. Captain Knox watched the wreckage of the Zakari destroyer floating in flames. "No survivors," reported his weapons officer. Knox nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Let that be the introduction." Back in orbit, the Zakari fleet scrambled. To respond, more destroyers and light cruisers moved toward the human ships. Weapons hot, they didn't recognize the humans, but they saw the firepower and reacted with fear. From the Liberty Flame, Eva Carter locked onto 2 Zakari cruisers. "Targets locked," she whispered. "Missiles away." 12 missiles launched from the Liberty's belly, each one tipped with tungsten heads and plasma warheads. They flew silently through space before crashing into the enemy ships. One ship vanished instantly, the second cracked in half, leaking crew into the vacuum. A third Zakari ship tried to run until fighter jets from Earth arrived. Kelly Monroe led the attack wing, flying in tight formation with 3 other pilots. Her fighter, Echo 9, locked onto the fleeing ship's engines. "Say goodnight," she muttered. Pulling the trigger, a blue beam burst from her ship, slicing through the Zakari's rear thrusters. The cruiser lost control and spiraled into a nearby moon. Breaking apart on impact, back on the Widowmaker, Captain Briggs kept his voice calm as more Zakari ships exploded. "Make it clean," he ordered. "Precise, no collateral." The humans weren't just powerful, they were disciplined. Each hit was calculated, surgical, and fast. No wasted shots, no reckless destruction. Every human ship fought like it had one goal, end the enemy, protect the planet, and move on in the sky above Trillos. The people who had once wept now stood on rooftops, watching streaks of fire and flashes of light. At first, they were terrified, thinking more Zakari were attacking. But then they noticed something. The Zakari ships were the ones burning. For the first time in weeks, the flames in the sky weren't hurting them. They were saving them. A young Trelos child pointed up and whispered, "The fire. It's chasing the monsters away." And her mother began to cry, not in fear, but in hope. The queen watched from the ruins of her palace, eyes wide. She turned to her guards, her voice shaking. "Who are they?" she asked. Her guard replied quietly, "They say they are humans." The queen frowned. "But weren't they the Deathworlders?" The guard nodded slowly. "Yes, your grace, they are." And above them, the human fleet prepared for the next wave. There would be no negotiations, no delay, and no chance for the Zakari to regroup. Humanity had arrived not to join the galaxy, but to correct it. And this was only the beginning. The skies over Trillos were no longer dark with fear, they were now bright with fire. But this fire did not bring pain to the people below. It brought hope. The people of Trillos stood in the streets, watching explosions light up the clouds above. Some thought it was the end, but others, those brave enough to believe, began to realize the truth. The Zakari were losing, and something or someone was fighting back. High above the planet, the human fleet moved like a pack of wolves. They hunted with precision, using speed and power the Zakari had never faced before. Inside the USS Liberty Flame, Lieutenant Eva Carter gave orders to fire another missile volley. The ship shook as the launch tubes opened, and a storm of warheads flew toward a Zakari base hidden on the planet's surface. Seconds later, that base was gone, replaced with dust and fire. Eva leaned back in her chair, her eyes locked on the screen. "No mercy," she said. "Not for slavers." Elsewhere in the fleet, smaller fighter ships flew in tight formation. One of them was Echo 9, piloted by Kelly Monroe. She had just downed her second enemy craft and was chasing a third when her wingmate's voice came through the radio. "They're retreating, Kelly. Can you believe this? Zakari ships are running." Kelly smiled, just slightly. "They should have run sooner," she replied. "Now it's too late." From orbit, the USS Widowmaker watched everything, monitoring ground and air targets. Captain Briggs stood calmly on the command deck, arms behind his back. "Send an Echo Squad," he said. "It's time we hit them on the ground, in the belly of the ironclad." Inside the troop bay, Echo Squad stood ready, 10 Marines in full combat armor, each one trained for high-risk planetary operations. At the front was Sergeant Riley Brooks, Tall, quiet, and respected by all his team. He checked his rifle, then looked at his squad. "No speeches," he said. "You know why we're here. We hit their stronghold. We protect civilians. We leave no one behind." The squad nodded and boarded the drop pod. With a loud hiss and blast of fire, the pod shot down through the atmosphere like a burning spear. Trelos watched as something streaked down from the sky. People covered their heads, unsure if it was a bomb, until the pod slowed and landed safely in the middle of a ruined city square. The doors blasted open, and Echo Squad came out like ghosts. Weapons up, armor glowing. The Zakari soldiers in the area were caught by surprise. They thought they had finished with this city. They were wrong. Brooks raised his rifle and fired first. One Zakari soldier went down before the others even turned. Rest of the squad moved in quickly, clearing alleys and rooftops. They found frightened civilians hiding in broken buildings. Some wounded, some too scared to speak. Private Leo Harris, the youngest in the squad, knelt beside a child and offered his water pack. "We're here to help," he said softly. Even though the child didn't understand the words, they didn't need to. The kindness in his eyes said enough. As Echo Squad pushed forward, they encountered heavy fire from a Zakari bunker. 3 squad members returned fire, laying down cover as Brooks and Harris flanked the enemy. Harris threw a shock grenade into the bunker. Then Brooks led the charge, clearing the inside with brutal efficiency. One by one, the Zakari were driven out of the city and wherever they ran. Earth's fighters followed from above. Kelly's voice came through the squad comms. "You've got clear airspace, Echo," she said. "We've got your backs." Up in orbit, the USS Ironclad detected a large Zakari weapons depot. It was close to a civilian zone, too close for a direct missile strike. Captain Knox growled. "We need precision." He contacted Briggs. "Permission to deploy rail shot." "Granted," Briggs replied. "Make it clean." Knox turned to his gunnery team. "Load kinetic spike." A long steel rod, heavier than a tank, was loaded into the railgun chamber. No explosives, no fire, just raw speed and gravity. The Ironclad fired. The spike hit the Zakari depot with such force that the explosion was contained inward, vaporizing the weapons, but sparing the nearby buildings. People hiding just blocks away looked up. Confused, they expected fire, death, more screaming. Instead, they saw dust settling and silence. The attack had ended. A young woman stepped out of hiding, staring at the human drop pod still glowing in the square. She whispered, "Who are they?" An old Drelosian beside her said, "Deathworlders." "But they didn't come to destroy us." "No," she said slowly. "They came to save us." Back inside the Widowmaker, Briggs watched the live feed from the ground. It wasn't over, but something had changed. The Zakari were used to being the hunters now. They were the hunted. Briggs turned to his comms officer. "Status report." "All targets in Zone Alpha neutralized," the officer replied. "Echo Squad secure. 0 civilian casualties." Briggs nodded. "Good," he said. "Mark the city green. Trelos is fighting back." And above that city, in the stars, Earth's warships stood like silent giants, not gods, not conquerors, but guardians, and they weren't done yet. The fires across Trelos had barely cooled when the Zakari struck again. But this time, they weren't attacking small towns or defenseless civilians. They were aiming at the human fleet far above the planet. Space began to shift and twist as dozens of Zakari warships jumped into orbit. They came fast, in formation, sleek, red-hulled destroyers and massive battlecruisers. This was not a scouting force. This was the Blood Serpent Fleet, the elite strike force of the Zakari Empire, commanded by High Warlord Kravak, known for burning 5 worlds in a single day. From his flagship, the Claw of Tyranny, he gave one order: erase the humans. He growled, "Break them, burn their ships, and leave no wreckage." The Zakari ships opened fire immediately, targeting the Widowmaker, Liberty Flame, and Ironclad. Missiles flew, beams of red energy sliced through space, and plasma cannons lit the stars. On the USS Widowmaker, Captain Briggs narrowed his eyes as alarms rang. They brought their best, said his second-in-command. Briggs nodded calmly. Then so did we. The human fleet responded with brutal force. Railguns fired from the ironclad, launching steel slugs the size of cars at supersonic speeds. One Zakari cruiser was torn in half instantly, spinning into darkness. Ava Carter on the Liberty Flame launched a wave of EMP missiles, jamming enemy guidance systems and knocking out targeting arrays. Enemy ships started to lose control, firing in random directions. But the Zakari were not weak. They had numbers, and they had rage. 3 of their destroyers focused fire on the Liberty Flame, punching through its shields and hitting the lower decks. Sparks flew, systems went dark, and smoke filled the control room. Ava coughed and grabbed the fire extinguisher, spraying down the flames herself. Damage to engines. Someone shouted. She wiped blood from her forehead and shouted, "We're not dying here. Route power to backup thrusters and target their command ship." Meanwhile, in the Widowmaker, Briggs made a quick decision. "Split formation," he ordered. "Draw them in. Then cut off their rear." The human fleet broke apart and moved like no other force in the galaxy. They didn't fight like the other species, slow, careful, defensive. They fought like predators, fast, aggressive, and without fear. The USS Thunderchild cloaked and circled behind the Zakari lines, aiming for the claw of tyranny itself. While the Zakari were distracted by the Widowmaker's heavy guns, the Thunderchild launched a piercing spike through the enemy's command deck. High Warlord Krovak stared in disbelief as his bridge cracked open and air rushed out. His last words were not commands, but a scream. The claw of tyranny exploded, the fireball lighting up half the orbit. The Zakari fleet, now leaderless, began to break formation. But the humans weren't finished yet. On the planet, Echo Squad had barely taken a breath when news of the enemy fleet came in. SGT. Brooks received the message, eyes narrowing. "They're trying to blast the city from orbit," said his comms tech. "Then we move now," Brooks replied. "Find that forward beacon and shut it down. They need it to guide orbital strikes." The squad raced through broken streets and rubble, dodging fallen towers and destroyed Zakari tanks. They reached a tall building where the Zakari had set up a comms array. At the top, a beacon glowed red, sending signals to the Zakari warships above. Brooks pointed up. "Leo, Emma, cover the door. Jake, with me, cut that signal before more civilians die." They fought up every floor, room by room, pushing through barricades and enemy soldiers. At the rooftop, they reached the beacon, but Zakari troops were already waiting. A brutal firefight began, both sides exchanging fire at close range. Private Leo Harris saw a grenade roll toward his team. Without thinking, he dove forward, grabbing it and throwing it over the edge of the building just in time. The explosion lit the night sky, and his arm was bleeding badly, but the squad kept moving. Brooks reached the beacon and planted explosives around it. He tapped his comms. "This is Echo 1, rooftop secure. Prepare for a light show." Seconds later, the beacon exploded in a flash of blue and orange. In space, the Zakari fleet instantly lost targeting for the city. Missiles meant to destroy buildings instead missed and flew into empty fields or the ocean. Back in orbit, the Liberty Flame had stabilized, engines firing again. Ava Carter grinned as her screen showed Zakari ships spinning in panic. "Let's finish this," she whispered. With a final barrage of missiles and railgun strikes, the remaining Zakari vessels were destroyed, disabled, or forced to retreat into deep space. Earth had lost no ships. The Liberty Flame had taken heavy damage. But it was still flying, still fighting, and that was enough in the Widowmaker. Captain Briggs received the full report. Zakari flagship destroyed. Echo Squad safe, orbital beacon down. He stood silently, looking out at the burning wreckage in orbit. Then he turned to his officers and said, "They thought we wouldn't come. They thought we were weak." He walked to the strategy table and tapped a red marker. "This war just changed," he said, "and we just became the enemy's worst nightmare." All across the galaxy, signals were being intercepted. Alien governments watched in silence as news came in. Zakari Blood Serpent fleet destroyed. By humans, by Deathworlders, by the species no one dared to call allies, and on Trelos, people gathered in the streets once again, not in fear, but in celebration. They didn't know all the human names. They didn't understand all the weapons, but they knew one thing: the monsters were finally afraid, and the fire in the sky was now their protection. The Zakari fleet had been destroyed. Their strongest warships shattered, their proudest commanders dead. But the war was not over yet. The real danger was still on the ground, hiding deep in the ruined streets of Trelos. Echo Squad had returned to base camp after destroying the Zakari beacon. The soldiers were tired, wounded, and covered in dust and blood, but they didn't rest. Because new orders came in, and this time, they were more dangerous than anything before. A hidden Zakari bunker had been found near the capital ruins. Inside were not only weapons, but prisoners. Trelos civilians still alive, kept in chains, guarded by the most brutal Zakari ground forces. The mission was clear: rescue the civilians or die trying. Sergeant Riley Brooks gathered his team, standing in the middle of a dark room lit by only one map screen. "We're going in light," he said. "No backup, no air support. We're the only ones close enough." Private Leo Harris, still bandaged from the grenade incident, spoke up. "I can still fight, sir," he said, holding his rifle tightly. Brooks nodded. "Good, because they'll need all of us." Echo Squad moved through the silent ruins, each step careful, each corner watched. Trelos had become a ghost town: burned buildings, shattered statues, crushed hopes. But even in that darkness, the squad moved with purpose, because somewhere in those ruins, children were crying in the dark, and no one else was coming. They reached the outer wall of the bunker at nightfall. There was no time to wait. The squad split into two teams. Brooks would lead the breach team through the front, while Leo would sneak through the ventilation shaft with two others. The plan was risky, but there was no other way. The Zakari guards didn't expect anyone to come into their base. They were relaxed, laughing, even playing with stolen items taken from the cities they destroyed. Until the first explosion blew the front gate open. Flashbangs filled the air with white light, and then Echo Squad stormed in. Brooks moved like a machine, dropping two Zakari with precise shots, then diving behind cover. Emma, the team's medic, followed, firing her sidearm and pulling a wounded civilian out from a corner. The bunker turned into chaos, alarms blaring, fires starting, and shadows moving everywhere. Inside the ventilation shaft, Leo crawled through tight metal walls, his hands shaking but his mind focused. He reached the prison room and looked through the grate. Dozens of civilians were trapped in cages, including small children and elders. Zakari guards stood near the doors, laughing. Leo whispered into his visual on targets. "I'm going in." He kicked out the grate and dropped to the floor, catching one Zakari off guard with a shot to the chest. The others turned, shouting. But it was too late. Leo threw a shock grenade that knocked them down. He rushed to the cages and opened them. One by one, a small girl clung to his arm and whispered, "Are you real?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'm real." "Are you a Deathworlder?" she asked quietly. He smiled. "No, I'm just a guy from Earth." Back in the main hallway, Brooks and his team had reached the command center. They found detailed maps of Trelos, lists of prisoners, and even plans to build more camps. "We have to end this now," Brooks said. "Burn it all." They planted explosives across the bunker, then began the escape. But just as they reached the exit, a heavy explosion rocked the whole building. The Zakari had triggered a trap, trying to collapse the entire bunker with everyone inside. Leo shielded two children as the ceiling cracked above them. Brooks shouted through the radio, "Get out!" Now, smoke filled the halls, and fire blocked the back exit. There was only one way out now, a narrow maintenance shaft through the lower tunnels. Brooks grabbed a wounded civilian over his shoulder. Leo carried another child, and the rest of the squad guided the others through the smoke-filled tunnels. The exit was close, but the heat and smoke were getting worse. Private Emma collapsed. From the heat, coughing, Brooks turned back and lifted her up without a word. The shaft door opened, and clean air rushed in. They all burst out into the night, falling to the grass, coughing, bleeding, but alive. Every single civilian was saved. They looked back at the bunker, just as it exploded in full, sending flames high into the sky. Trilo citizens, once hopeless and silent, now stood together in safety. Some hugged their children for the first time. In weeks, others just stared at the stars in disbelief. One boy asked Leo, "Why did you come?" He replied, "Because someone had to." A young mother approached Sergeant Brooks with tears in her eyes. "You didn't know us," she said. "You had nothing to gain." Brooks looked at her and answered, "That's what makes us human." That night, Echo Squad didn't sleep. They sat in a circle near the rescued civilians, watching the stars, ready for anything, and high above them, the human warships remained in orbit, silent and powerful. They had come without promises, without flags, without speeches, but they had brought something more important. They had brought protection, and now, hope was rising again on the broken soil of Trelos. The sun was rising over Trelos. The sky, once filled with smoke and fire, now showed soft colors, orange, gold, and blue, for the first time in weeks. No Zakari ships were flying overhead. No bombs fell from the sky. No screams filled the air, just silence, broken by the sound of rebuilding. But peace hadn't come for free. It had been bought with sacrifice, with courage, and with fire. Now, the Zakari Empire, broken and furious, sent a final message to the humans orbiting above. Their words were short and filled with venom. "Leave Trelos now, or face total war." The message was received on every human ship on the USS Widowmaker. Captain Briggs read it twice. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He looked up at the stars and said, "So, they still don't get it." He turned to his communications officer. "Don't respond." Not yet. The Zakari had lost most of their fleet, but they still had colonies, weapons, and billions of soldiers across the galaxy. This message wasn't a threat. It was a challenge. Captain Briggs walked to the war room, where the other fleet commanders were waiting. "Total war," said Captain Knox from the USS Ironclad. "Let them come," Eva Carter replied coldly from the Liberty Flame. "They'll leave in pieces," but Briggs had a better plan. "I'm not waiting for them to strike," he said. "We hit first, but not with more ships." Everyone turned to him. Confused, he pointed to the screen, where a special weapon was displayed. "Project Atlas," he said. "It's ready, and it's time." Deep in Earth's classified shipyards, the Titan-class dreadnought USS Thunderheart had been completed in secret. It had no luxury, no ceremony, and no space for weakness. Its main cannon could destroy a small moon. Its armor could survive direct hits from black hole bombs. And now, it was arriving in orbit above Trelos. The Zakari Empire didn't know it yet, but they were about to see what Earth called a final warning. Inside the Thunderheart, everything was silent. Thousands of crew stood ready, weapons locked, systems glowing red. From the bridge, Admiral Neil Grant looked at the orders, then said 2 words: "Target set." The Thunderheart aimed not at Trelos, but far into space, at one of the Zakari Empire's hidden shipyards, a place where they built new warships and stored weapons of mass destruction. Earth had traced the location using Zakari data captured by Echo Squad. Now the humans were going to answer the Zakari threat with action. Not words. Admiral Grant gave the countdown. 3, 2, 1. The Titan cannon fired. It didn't look like much at first, just a beam of white energy shot across space at near light speed. But when it hit the Zakari shipyard, the result was terrifying. A silent explosion bloomed in the darkness, so powerful it bent space around it. The entire station disappeared, melted into ash, along with thousands of warships under construction. There was no sound, no screams, just nothing. The galaxy watched in silence as news spread within minutes. Zakari High Command Station destroyed in one shot, by one human ship. No invasion, no fleet, just one warning. Back on Trelos, Captain Briggs finally responded to the Zakari message. Sent only a short video footage of the destroyed station. No words were spoken. The message was clear. If you continue, we won't invade. We will end you. The Zakari Empire went silent. There was no reply, no threats, just silence. And in that silence, Earth 1, down on the planet, the people of Trelos gathered in the central plaza, where the great statue of their first queen once stood, now broken by bombs. They began rebuilding it. But with one change: next to the queen, they added a new statue, a human soldier standing tall, holding a broken chain in one hand and a small Trelos child in the other. It wasn't just for Echo Squad or Briggs or Earth. It was for the idea that even in the darkest parts of the galaxy, someone would still stand up for the weak. Later that night, Queen Alira met Captain Briggs face to face. She was no longer wearing royal robes, just a plain dress, her crown gone, her eyes full of emotion. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice shaking. "I know," Briggs replied, "but we did." She looked at him carefully, then asked, "Will you stay?" He shook his head. "We came to help, not to rule. But we owe you everything," she said, tears rising. Briggs smiled just a little. "Then teach your people what we taught the Zakari. Strength doesn't come from fear. It comes from standing for something greater than yourself." That night, across Earth's fleet, soldiers packed their gear, pilots cleaned their fighters, and engineers finished repairs. Trelos no longer needed defense, it needed peace, and peace was exactly what Earth had given them, not by begging, not by negotiating, but by drawing a line in the stars and daring evil to cross it. And when it did, Earth answered the only way a Deathworld knew how: with fire, with steel, with honor, and above all, with heart.